Greetings loyal subscribers and honoured guests. I'm back with another episode of RetroGrade, this time taking a look at the arcade classic Star Force. I'll be playing the arcade original first before moving on to the MSX and NES versions. The arcade version was released in 1984 by Tekken, who later changed their name to Tecmo, famous for games like Tecmo Bowl and in recent years Ninja Gaiden and Dead or Alive. This is a classic style vertical shooter, fairly simple in its design compared to what came later. Especially the recent trend of bullet hell shooters that I just can't get on with. The player took control of the final star ship and progressed through different stages that were all named after the letters of the Greek alphabet. There are apparently 25 levels in the arcade version, though I wouldn't really know because I seldom managed to get past the third stage. Enemies attack in waves, each moving and behaving differently, some of them rather annoying. There are baddies who split into a V shape when you hit them, and others that multiply and take numerous shots to kill. Unlike other games of this type, your options for powering up are quite limited. From time to time one of two items will appear, one of which will give you auto fire for as long as you manage to stay alive, combined with an extremely jaunty tune. The other one will explode and wipe out all of the enemies on screen if you shoot it enough times. Around the middle of a stage, an enemy will form together out of multiple pieces, and you'll need to hammer the fire button in order to kill it quickly, though there is an exploit that involves leaving it alive. If you don't kill this enemy and simply dodge it as it moves around, you can apparently skip all of the remaining enemies for the stage until you get to the boss. The bosses in Star Force are all basically the same, a platform with two guns on either side and a square with a Greek letter of the stage you're on in the middle, which will take off and fly around. Blast the letter enough times and it's on to the next stage. Scattered throughout each stage are small and capital B icons, and you want to try and shoot all of each type. By doing so, you will be awarded a major score bonus at the end of the stage, which is important for earning extra lives. There are no continues in the arcade version, which is something I like about it. So many arcade games can be finished eventually simply by chucking in more cash. With Star Force you don't have that option, so it remains a pure game of skill. Overall, I would award the arcade version of Star Force 4.5 supernovas out of 5. Why supernovas, you ask? Well, it's spacey, and I had a hard time coming up with anything else relevant to this game. While the graphics are hardly amazing nowadays, they do still hold a simple charm to them. I do think the music is fantastic though, sticking in the memory even when you're not playing the game. With this fairly modest hardware, you'd think that the home ports would be easy to get right, wouldn't you? Well, you only have to look at the MSX version to realise that this isn't quite the case. At first glance, things look pretty decent. The level designs are all similar, the enemies are all there, and everything is quite authentic to the design of the original game. The audio is fairly simplistic, but there is a recognisable version of the music, and the game still manages to have a pew pew noise at the same time. But then you see the thing in motion and try not to throw up. You see, the MSX version of Star Force has some of the most jerky background animation I've ever seen. It really is hard on the eyes and makes the game very difficult to play without suffering from a headache or nausea. It does really spoil what would otherwise have been a very decent version of the game. As a result, I'm afraid I can only give the MSX version of Star Force 2 supernovas out of 5. Finally, let's take a look at the NES version of Star Force. Now that's more like it. While the detail of the graphics has definitely taken a hit, and there is some rather ugly slowdown when there are a lot of enemies on the screen at once, this is a very decent attempt to port the arcade version to a home platform. The music is a bit on the weedy side, which is a shame. In terms of gameplay, it's all there. The enemy patterns are all accurate, you have the auto fire and smart bomb power-ups, there are the bonus Bs, the mid-boss enemy and the end-of-level bosses. The order of the stages does appear to be a little different because the third one in the arcade is Lambda, whereas it is Gamma on the NES. This is no big deal though. The main difference between this and the arcade though is that you get to continue. I wasn't all that sure I liked the idea of this at first, though it does reset your score and you can only continue a few times, so it's not as bad as I thought. If I was a fan of the arcade game back in the day and I had spent my pocket money on this port, I think I would have been quite happy with it. I'm going to award it a score of 3.5 supernovas out of 5. So there we go. Have you played Star Force before? I often wonder how well known it is. I don't think it's in the same league as something like Galaga, but I do think it has a small following, more so in Japan than the West maybe. Thank you for watching this episode of RetroGrade. There'll be more like this to come in the future. In the meantime, take care.